Why did nobody ever notice her hands? They never trembled, not once in 3 years, not when she logged ammunition, not when she signed off shipments, not even when she cleaned rifles that other people treated like props in training exercises. Her fingers moved with the kind of control you'd expect from a surgeon or a sniper, but to everyone else she was invisible. Just Madison Cole, the quiet clerk who never complained about overtime, who kept immaculate ammo logs, who blended into the background of Fort's shooting range like one more piece of concrete. That invisibility was by design. At 6:30 hours, she pushed open the heavy metal door to the range facility, thermos of black coffee steaming against the cold November air. The fluorescent lights buzzed as they flickered awake. She moved like someone who'd done this ritual 1,000 times because she had. Unlock the ammunition room. Inventory the crates. Cross-check the serial numbers against her logbook, every digit in the same neat handwriting. Her colleagues thought she was obsessive. They didn't know that for her, precision wasn't paperwork. It was survival. The story everyone believed was simple. Madison Cole, former logistics clerk, divorced, needed a quieter post. The kind of person who requested range duty because she liked routine. A small life after a messy breakup. No one questioned it because the best lies were stitched from threads of truth. Yes, there had been a divorce, but the mess hadn't been lawyers and signatures. It had been blood on the floor of a compound in Syria. And she had walked away from it carrying a silence she could never fully put down. Sergeant Peters arrived at 7:15 sharp, stomping his boots, muttering curses about the cold. He always filled the silence with noise. The kind of man who bragged about firefights he had never seen, who spoke loudly about war but had never carried its weight. Madison recognized the type instantly. She smiled politely, handed him his clipboard, and went back to her logs. "You ever fire one of these beauties, Cole?" he asked once, tapping a rifle like it was a toy. His voice carried that edge of patronizing curiosity reserved for those who thought she was just another support clerk. Madison gave her practice smile, the one that said, "I'm harmless, don't bother digging deeper. I'm better with paperwork than firearms, Sergeant. That's why they keep me back here." He chuckled, satisfied with the lie. What he didn't know was that she had once placed a bullet through a window at nearly 2,000 meters, a shot that required calculating wind speed, humidity, even the effect of the Earth's rotation. The kind of shot that made even other snipers shake their heads in disbelief. But she wore that memory like a scar no one could see. By 10:30, the officers began to arrive for their monthly qualification. Captains, majors, the usual parade of middle-ranking brass. They joked about weekend plans and assignments while checking their rifles with half-hearted attention. To them, Madison was background noise. She handed out ammunition the way a clerk handed out pens, forgotten the moment they stepped onto the line. But one officer was different. Colonel Harrison. She noticed him before, not because he commanded attention like some senior officers did, but because he didn't. He carried himself with an economy of movement that only came from experience in places where mistakes meant death. His eyes were sharp, his presence deliberate, his voice calm. The gray in his temples didn't make him softer, it made him dangerous. When he stepped up to her table with his M4 cradled casually in his hands, he spoke with quiet authority. "Ammunition for qualification, please." Madison handed him the magazines. Their fingers brushed for the briefest second, and when she looked up, their eyes locked. There was a flicker, something unspoken, something searching. He moved on, but the moment left her unsettled. She watched him on the firing line. His stance was perfect. His shots weren't just accurate, they were deliberate, groupings tight, breathing controlled. This wasn't a man punching paper for a promotion. This was a man who had fired to save lives, or to take them. She recognized it because it mirrored her own rhythm. During a break, the colonel returned to her table. She was jotting numbers into her logbook when his shadow fell across her. "You maintain excellent records," he said, scanning her handwriting. "Attention to detail prevents problems later," she replied evenly. His eyes lingered on her hands. She knew why. She'd spent years softening the calluses from rifle stocks, filing down the hard edges of skin that betrayed her. But someone like him, someone who had lived in the same shadows, he would see the traces. "How long have you been at range operations, Miss Cole?" he asked. "3 years, sir, since my transfer from supply." "And before the military?" His tone sharpened just slightly, like a test. Madison kept her answer steady. "College, sir, business degree, Ohio State, nothing exciting." The colonel smiled faintly, but his eyes didn't. "I've found the most interesting people usually have the least exciting official biographies." Before she could respond, Sergeant Peters called out from the line. The colonel returned to his place, but Madison knew something had shifted. His questions weren't casual. His words carried weight. He wasn't looking at her like background anymore. He was looking at her like a puzzle. The qualification ended an hour later. Officers packed up, chatter echoing through the range. Madison cleaned, logged, and prepared to leave. That's when she realized her military ID badge wasn't clipped to her uniform. She cursed it under her breath. Losing it meant paperwork and questions she couldn't afford. She found it near a pile of target sheets, half hidden beneath spent casings. As she bent to pick it up, footsteps approached. Colonel Harrison. "Forget something?" he asked lightly, though his eyes were fixed on the badge in her hand. "Can't leave base without it," she said quickly, trying to slip it into her pocket. "Mind if I take a look?" His tone was polite, but it wasn't a request. For a moment she hesitated, then she handed it over. Their fingers brushed again, but this time she felt the weight in his grip. He raised the badge to the light, scanning it carefully. Name, photo, assignment, and then his expression changed, subtly but unmistakably. His eyes widened, his face drained of color. He had seen it, the classified stamp, the operational clearance, and the number, 121. Madison's pulse quickened. She had grabbed the wrong badge that morning, not the sanitized version but the real one, the one that listed her confirmed eliminations. The number whispered in classified halls. The number tied to a ghost known only as Spectre, a sniper so precise, so relentless, that her name was spoken with both awe and fear in units that officially pretended she didn't exist. Colonel Harrison lowered the badge slowly. When his eyes met hers again, there was no trace of casual politeness left, only recognition. "Miss Cole," he said softly, "I think we need to have a much longer conversation." In that moment, Madison felt the air tighten around her. The careful cover she had maintained for 3 years shattered, the quiet clerk she had built gone. And with it came the familiar, razor-sharp sensation she thought she'd buried forever: exposure. Her mind started calculating without her permission. Exit strategies, threat assessments. How quickly could she disappear if she had to? She kept her face neutral, her voice even. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir. Is there a problem with my identification?" But she knew, and he knew. The colonel studied her face like a code he meant to crack. "The problem, Miss Cole, is that this badge indicates you have a very specific type of operational experience, the kind that doesn't usually lead to clerical work at a training range." His voice was calm, but his words carried weight, and Madison knew this was the moment she had always feared. The moment when the world stopped seeing Madison Cole, the clerk, and started seeing Spectre. What happens when the mask slips? For 3 years, Madison Cole had lived as if her past were buried under concrete. But now, in the colonel's office, the air felt different, charged, heavy, like the seconds before a trigger break. Colonel Harrison poured coffee with slow, deliberate movements. His words were steady, but there was tension in the set of his shoulders. "In 24 years of service, Miss Cole, This is the first time I've discovered that my range safety clerk might also be one of the most lethal individuals currently in uniform. Madison didn't flinch. She let the silence stretch, the way she'd learned to do in interrogations where every word was a liability. But inside, her heartbeat drummed like rifle recoil in her chest. "My name is Madison Cole," she said finally, her tone flat, controlled. "That much is true. The rest of the details on that badge are not for discussion." The colonel set his coffee down and leaned forward. "Then let's call them what they are, classified. But classified or not, I know what I saw, and I know what it means." His eyes were locked on hers, steady, unblinking. Madison had stared down insurgents, mercenaries, even foreign operators with death in their eyes. But the way Harrison looked at her now, it wasn't threat. It was calculation. "You were Spectre," he said quietly. The word cut through the air like a suppressed shot. Madison's throat tightened. She had heard that whispered in the field, passed like ghost stories between units that never officially met. Spectre wasn't supposed to exist. That was the point. And yet here it was, spoken out loud in a quiet office by a man who knew exactly what it meant. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if we could discuss this somewhere more private," she replied, her voice steady. He nodded. "My office, 20 minutes." When she left the room, her steps were precise, but inside, everything was unraveling. She built her cover on routine, predictability. Now the routine was gone. In the mirror of the women's restroom, she studied her own reflection. The uniform, the neat bun, the quiet face that belonged to a desk clerk. She whispered to herself under her breath, words she hadn't spoken in years: "Don't break cover, don't let them see." But Harrison had already seen. His office smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the kind of place where decisions carried weight but rarely consequence. For Madison, it was different. Consequences followed her like shadows. "Coffee?" he offered. She nodded, more for the ritual than the drink. "Miss Cole," he began again once they were seated, "help me understand something. How does someone with your record end up here, logging ammunition at a range?" The way he said it, it wasn't ridicule. It was genuine confusion, tinged with respect. Madison stared at the steam rising from her cup. For a moment, she let herself remember. The long nights in desert compounds, the cold, high-altitude deployments, the missions where she'd gone days without sleep, weeks without certainty that she'd live to see another sunrise. The faces she could still recall, even if she couldn't remember their names. "After my last assignment," she said slowly, choosing each word like it was a round chambered into a rifle, "I needed transition. Range duty gave me structure, quiet, a way to serve without going back out there." "Transition," Harrison repeated as if tasting the word. "You mean recovery?" Her jaw tightened. She hated when officers tried to name her wounds for her. Recovery wasn't the right word. Survival was. "I chose this assignment," she replied flatly. "That's all that matters." But the colonel leaned back, studying her with eyes that had seen too much themselves. "I respect that, but the military doesn't bury assets like you without a reason. So let me ask, what would it take to bring Spectre back?" The silence stretched. Madison stared at him, unblinking, and thought about how easy it would be to lie, to say never, to say she was done. But then the phone on his desk rang. The colonel answered, his face shifted as he listened. Concern, tension, his jaw set hard. "Understood, I'll take it from here." He hung up and looked at her, different now, urgent. "Miss Cole, we have a situation." Her instincts fired before her logic did. A situation. That meant hostages or insurgents or a facility compromised. Her mind raced ahead of his words, calculating terrain, entry points, choke zones. He slid a map across the desk. "Mountain training facility, 40 miles northeast. Taken by armed individuals 2 hours ago. Unknown number of hostiles. Multiple instructors and trainees held hostage." Madison's breath slowed. automatically falling into the rhythm she used before engagements. "Standard assault?" she asked. He shook his head. "Too risky. Defenders hold high ground. They're trained, equipped. An assault would leave hostages dead and soldiers in body bags." And then he said the words she already knew were coming. "We need precision, long range, someone who can dismantle their command structure before they can react, someone like you." For a moment, Madison said nothing. She felt it, the pull of a world she had buried, the weight of decisions where one breath could mean life or death. "Sir," she said quietly, "I left that behind for a reason." "And I wouldn't ask," Harrison replied, his voice firm but not harsh. "Not unless there was no other option." Madison stood and walked to the window. Beyond the glass, mountains carved themselves into the horizon, their peaks sharp and white with snow. She knew those ridges. She studied the maps when she first arrived out of habit, out of paranoia. Now they weren't just mountains. They were firing positions. 12 instructors, 30 trainees, hostages. If she said no, some of them would die. If she said yes, Spectre would step out of the shadows and Madison Cole would be gone forever. She closed her eyes. She could almost hear the report of her rifle in the still air, the silence after the kill, the way the world went quiet when she exhaled and pressed the trigger. When she turned back to him, her voice was steady. "All right, tell me what I need to know." Her operational gear had been locked in secure storage since the day she left the field. When she cracked open the case, the smell of gun oil and steel rose like an old memory. The rifle fit her hands like it had never left them. The scope clicked into place with comforting precision. "How does it feel?" Harrison asked softly, watching her check the balance, the trigger pull. Madison paused, the rifle resting across her knees. "Like putting on clothes I swore I'd never wear again." There was no triumph in her voice, only resignation. Within an hour, she was airborne in a helicopter headed for the staging area. The map spread across her lap, headset crackling with updates. 8 to 12 hostiles, unknown affiliations, hostages confined to the main hall, defenders positioned along the access road, professionals, not amateurs. The snow-covered ridges passed beneath them, and Madison studied every line of terrain, every shadow, every angle. Her mind moved ahead of the helicopter, placing firing positions, calculating wind tunnels, imagining where she'd crawl, where she'd settle into the earth and become invisible. Spectre was emerging again, not by choice, by necessity. The staging area came into view, soldiers moving with controlled urgency, equipment being loaded, radios buzzing. Harrison met her on the ground. His eyes were steady, but his tone carried weight. "Rules of engagement, clean shots only. No risks to hostages, positive identification before every trigger pull." "Understood," Madison replied, chambering the first round with a metallic click. And as the helicopter blades faded into the distance, she moved alone into the snow. The mountains waited, so did the ghosts. How long could she keep pretending she wasn't who she was? The snow crunched under her boots as Madison moved through the tree line, rifle strapped tight across her back. The mountain air bit into her lungs, sharp and unforgiving. Each step forward was a step away from the fragile anonymity she had built, and deeper into the shadow of the ghost they once called Spectre. She moved alone. No chatter in her earpiece, no squad to cover her flanks. That was how it had always been. She preferred the silence. Silence told her the truth, the way the wind shifted, the way snow slid from a branch, the way her own breath fogged too heavily if her nerves got ahead of her discipline. Every movement was deliberate, low, controlled. She hugged the contours of the ridges, weaving her way toward a perch she'd already picked out from the satellite imagery, a place that gave her the widest view of the training facility below, with at least 2 escape routes if things went bad. She'd never go anywhere without them. Halfway up the slope, she crouched beneath a cluster of pines and checked her gear, scope alignment, ammunition count, communications rig, Every click of adjustment was muscle memory, her hands moving without hesitation. She hated how natural it still felt. Her earpiece crackled softly, Harrison's voice steady and restrained. Overwatch status. She breathed once before replying, eyes scanning the. Moving to position, 20 minutes. Copy, hostiles are holding tight, no demands yet. That was strange. No demands meant one of two things. Either the hostiles weren't ready or this wasn't about leverage. Madison frowned, adjusting the strap on her pack before continuing the climb. Professionals didn't storm a facility just to sit in silence. Snow gave way to bare rock near the crest. She crawled the last stretch on her belly, slow and methodical, pressing herself against the earth until her uniform blended with it. The world narrowed to the weight of her rifle, the smell of steel and oil, the rhythm of her breathing. When she finally reached the position, she lay prone and began the ritual. Bipod steady, scope mounted, angles checked, wind speed measured with a small strip of cloth that fluttered in the breeze. She calculated everything: humidity, distance, the density of the cold air. Numbers and variables all sliding into place like gears in a machine. And then she looked. Through the glass, the facility spread out below like a model on display. Rectangular buildings arranged around a central yard, their rooftops dusted with snow. Figures moved between them, men with rifles slung across their chests, postures too sharp to belong to conscripts or amateurs. 8 visible, military equipment, coordinated patrols. Her pulse slowed. This was what she knew. The world narrowed into grids, angles, patterns of movement. It was the closest thing she had to control. Overwatch in position, she whispered into the mic. Visual confirmation on 8 hostiles. Armed, equipped, movement is disciplined. Copy, Harrison replied. Any sign of hostages? She adjusted her scope, scanning window by window. Movement flickered inside the main training hall. She zoomed, adjusted, and froze. Figures huddled together, hands on their heads. Guards packing nearby. At least a dozen hostages, maybe more. Probable hostage location, she murmured. Main building, central room, 2 guards visible. There was a pause on the comms, the kind that meant Harrison was weighing options. Then his voice came back, steady but heavier. Understood. Maintain Overwatch. Division is authorizing you to neutralize leadership targets if confirmed. The words hit her harder than she expected. Neutralize. Such a clean way of saying kill. Her crosshairs drifted to a man standing near the compound's central building. His posture gave him away, others deferred to him, subtle glances, small signals of respect. Leader. Range, 600 meters, a perfect shot. She settled her breathing, the old rhythm sliding back in. Inhale, hold, exhale. The world quieted. For a moment she was back in another country, another war, where the first shot always decided the tempo of the mission. Her finger hovered near the trigger. But then something broke through the silence, her own thoughts, raw and unfiltered. 3 years. You swore you'd never do this again. Her pulse faltered. She blinked hard, pulling herself back to the scope. She couldn't afford doubt. Not now. Not with lives hanging in the balance. Overwatch, Harrison's voice broke in softly, almost like he knew what was happening inside her head. Your call, take it when you're ready. She swallowed hard, center mass, crosshairs steady, trigger squeeze. The rifle barked, the recoil absorbed into her shoulder like a heartbeat. Less than a second later, the leader dropped. Clean. Final. Command target neutralized, she reported, voice even. But inside, something shifted. The ghost had returned. Spectre was back. Below, chaos erupted. The other hostiles moved with discipline, cover, concealment, scanning for the unseen shooter. They didn't panic. That confirmed what she already suspected. These were trained operators. They knew how to absorb the shock, but they hadn't planned for her. Her scope swung to the perimeter guard. He had the best line of sight for coordination. She waited for him to lean into view, adjusted for the wind, and pressed again. Another crack, another body down. Her radio hissed. Harrison's voice carried a thread of urgency, but also relief. "Excellent work, Overwatch. Tactical team is preparing to move. Keep them off balance." She didn't answer, her focus tunneled. Every hostile she watched was a variable. Each breath she took was an equation. She mapped their positions in her head like pieces on a board. Her rifle was the hand that would move them, one by one, until the board was hers. Time slipped. Shots rang out, each one echoing in her chest like a memory she couldn't escape. By the time the assault team was in place, 5 hostiles were gone. The rest were fragmented, isolated, stripped of leadership. She whispered into the mic, her voice low, steady, detached. 3 remaining. Defensive positions. Recommend immediate assault. Copy, Overwatch. Assault team is moving. Stay sharp. Through her scope, she watched soldiers advance in disciplined formation, shadows darting from cover to cover. The hostiles tried to respond, but their cohesion was broken. Within minutes, it was over. Hostages freed. Weapons secured. The silence after was deafening. Madison lay still, her cheek pressed to the stock of her rifle, watching the empty yard below. Her muscles trembled, not from exhaustion but from something else, something heavier. 3 years she had hidden in plain sight. 3 years she had built a life out of quiet, routine safety. And in less than 4 hours, she had torn it apart with 6 clean shots. She pulled back from the scope and lay flat on the snow, eyes staring at the pale sky above. The ghost had stepped back into the light. And she knew there was no going back. What happens when the silence after the gunfire is louder than the shots themselves? Madison lay in the snow, still staring at the pale sky. Her rifle rested across her arms, warm barrel cooling in the mountain air. The facility below had gone quiet. No more hostile movement, no more desperate shouting, just the distant crackle of radios as the assault team swept through corridors and freed the hostages. Her earpiece buzzed with Harrison's voice, calm, steady, tinged with something she couldn't name. "Overwatch, outstanding work. Hostages are secure, stand by for extraction." She exhaled slowly. Her body felt weightless but her chest heavy. Every shot she'd taken had been precise, clean, deliberate. And yet they carried a weight that didn't vanish with the sound. 6 men dead because she had breathed at the right moment. She lived with that weight before. She knew how it lingered. Carefully she disassembled her position. Bipod folded, scope capped, empty casings pocketed, nothing left behind. That discipline never left you, it was drilled too deep. The trek back down the ridge felt longer than the climb up. Her muscles ached from the hours of prone stillness, but her mind ached more. Each step felt like a march away from the anonymity she had fought to build. Spectre had returned. Madison Cole, the clerk, was gone. At the staging area, the rotors of a waiting helicopter beat the air. Soldiers moved with organized chaos, hauling equipment, ushering hostages into trucks. Colonel Harrison stood at the center of it all, his posture tense but steady, his eyes tracking her approach. She handed him her rifle without a word. He accepted it like a man accepting something sacred. "You saved lives today," he said quietly. Madison looked past him at the freed hostages, faces pale, hands trembling, some crying, some stunned into silence. She didn't answer. Saving lives had always come at a cost. The helicopter ride back to base was cold and loud. Madison sat opposite Harrison, the rifle secured between them. He kept stealing glances at her, as if trying to read her thoughts through the set of her jaw, the stillness in her eyes. She didn't give him anything. When they landed, the world shifted again. No more snow, no more quiet, just bright lights, sharp voices, and the grinding machinery of military bureaucracy waking up to what had happened. Officers waited. Staff hurried with folders. Madison was ushered straight into a secure building, the door closing behind her like a lock snapping shut. The debriefing lasted hours. They wanted everything: angles, distances, wind calls, decision-making under pressure. Intelligence officers peppered her with questions, their pens scratching furiously as if her mind could be into doctrine. Senior commanders listened with their arms crossed, impressed but wary. Madison answered in the same clinical tone she'd always used for after-action reports. No embellishments, no emotion, just facts. But the truth was already bigger than the facts. Word spread fast. A range safety clerk had neutralized a professional hostile force with surgical precision. A clerk who wasn't a clerk at all. A ghost with 121 confirmed eliminations. A name spoken only in whispers had resurfaced. By nightfall, she was summoned to another room, smaller, quieter. Harrison was there, but so was a brigadier general. His insignia caught the light like steel. "Miss Cole," the general began, flipping through a thin folder that contained more about her than most people knew. "Today confirms what certain records have long suggested. You are among the most capable long-range specialists this military has ever produced." Madison sat straight, hands folded in her lap. Her voice was calm but edged with steel. "With respect, sir, I'm not interested in returning to operational deployment." The general studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand, but capability like yours is not something easily set aside. There may be alternatives, ways to utilize your expertise without forward deployments." Madison felt the walls closing in. She had expected this. Once the mask slipped, once Spectre stepped back into the light, there would be no way to shove her back into anonymity. Harrison cleared his throat gently. "She deserves time, sir. Today was more than enough." The general considered that, then closed the folder. "Very well, we'll revisit this. Miss Cole, thank you for your service today." When the door closed and the general left, Madison stayed seated, staring at the blank wall. Harrison spoke softly. "I told you, once this happened, you couldn't go back." She turned her head toward him, her eyes sharp. "I didn't ask for this, Colonel. I didn't want this." "I know." His tone carried no judgment, only gravity. "But sometimes it's not about what we want. It's about what's needed." Madison's jaw tightened. That phrase, "what's needed," had justified too many scars in her past. Later, in the dim quiet of her small apartment, she sat alone with a cup of untouched tea cooling on the table. Her uniform hung neatly in the closet. Her rifle was locked away in storage again. But the silence didn't feel the same. Her phone rang at 2100 hours, an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Miss Cole," the voice on the line was female, strong, confident. "This is Major General, Special Operations Command." Madison froze. That name carried weight. This wasn't a courtesy call. "I wanted to personally thank you," continued. "Your actions today prevented a tragedy. Your precision was decisive." "Ma'am," Madison said evenly, "I did my duty." "You did more than that, and I think you know it." The general's tone softened. "Miss Cole, I'm not asking you to go back to the tempo you left behind, but there may be ways for you to contribute: training programs, evaluations, strategic consulting. Roles that use your expertise without taking the same personal toll." Madison closed her eyes. The words were careful, but the meaning was clear. Spectre wasn't going back into hiding. Not completely. "Ma'am," she said after a long pause, "I requested non-operational duty for reasons that haven't changed." "I understand," replied smoothly, "but I also think there may be a middle ground, one that honors both your service and your need for stability. I'd like to discuss that with you in person." Madison said nothing for a long time. Finally, "All right, a discussion, nothing more." "Nothing more," the general promised. When the call ended, Madison sat in the silence, staring at the cooling tea. Spectre was back. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward that didn't destroy what was left of Madison Cole. What did it mean to step into a room, knowing everyone there knew what you were capable of? A week later, Madison Cole found herself standing outside a secure facility she'd never been inside before, wearing a uniform she rarely touched. The faded fatigues of a range clerk were gone. Today, she wore her service dress. The medals pinned to her chest said little, nothing of the years erased, the missions, the kills that never existed. They were decorations for another life, a cover story stitched in ribbon. The guard checked her identification twice, eyes flicking between her badge and her face. When he finally waved her through, Madison felt the familiar chill of entering spaces where secrets lived. The same sterile hallways, the same locked doors. She had thought she'd left all this behind. General was smaller than Madison expected. Compact, sharp-eyed, a woman in her early 50s whose presence filled the room without needing volume. She extended her hand with professional warmth. "Miss Cole, thank you for coming." Madison shook it, firm but not lingering. "Ma'am." Gestured toward a table already set with folders. "Please sit. I want this to be a conversation, not an interrogation." Madison sat, her back straight, her eyes scanning the room automatically for exits. Old habits, they never left. The general opened one of the folders, but she didn't read from it. She looked directly at Madison. "I've reviewed your record, both the official file and the classified one. What you've accomplished, very few people alive can match it." Madison's voice was steady. "Ma'am, I requested non-operational duty for a reason." "I know," said. She leaned back slightly, folding her hands. "And I'm not here to drag you back into deployments. I want to talk about alternatives, options that use your expertise without breaking what you've worked to rebuild." Madison felt a flicker of skepticism, but curiosity too. Alternatives. Nodded. "We're facing challenges that require more than boots on the ground. We need operators who can help shape the future, training programs, tactical evaluations, equipment testing. Your operational background makes you uniquely qualified." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were proposals, outlines for advanced sniper training, assessment of new optic systems, consultation on counter-sniper doctrine. Work that mattered, work that would save lives. Madison scanned the pages. The tasks were technical, structured, contained within controlled environments. No hostile ridges. No nights wondering if the next sunrise would be her last. But still, her name on these documents would mean Spectre wasn't buried anymore. It would mean accepting a role that admitted who she was. "Why me?" Madison asked quietly. "There are other snipers." "Not like you," replied. "Your record isn't just numbers, it's consistency, it's judgment, the ability to operate alone and still make decisions that change outcomes. That can't be taught in a classroom, but it can be passed on." Madison closed the folder. "And if I say no?" "Then you return to Fort," said calmly. "But let's be honest, after what happened, your cover as a clerk is gone. People talk. Even without the details, word spreads. You won't be invisible anymore." The words stung because they were true. The quiet life she'd built, the anonymity, it was already unraveling. She'd seen it in the way soldiers looked at her in the days since the mountain operation. Curious, respectful, but not blind anymore. Leaned forward, her voice softer now. "Miss Cole, I respect what you've given. I respect that you stepped back because you needed to. I'm not asking you to sacrifice that recovery. I'm offering you a way to serve without losing yourself again." Madison stared at her hands folded on the table. Hands that had ended 121 lives. Hands that still trembled sometimes when she tried to hold them still at night. She thought of the range clerks who joked about overtime, of Sergeant Peters with his easy arrogance. None of them would ever understand what those hands had done. But did. Harrison did. And maybe that was enough. She lifted her eyes. "A trial, that's all I'll agree to, nothing permanent." Relief flickered across the general's face, though her voice stayed measured. "Of course, we'll start with project-specific work. If it suits you, we expand. If not, you step away. No consequences." Madison gave a small nod. It wasn't commitment, but it was a door opening. The drive back to Fort was quiet. Harrison sat behind the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road but his presence steady beside her. After a while he glanced her way. "How'd it go?" Madison leaned back in her seat, staring at the blur of mountains through the window. "Better than I expected. Worse than I wanted. Middle ground. Something like that." She paused, then added, "She offered me a way to contribute, training, consulting, no deployments." Harrison nodded slowly, as if confirming his own hope. "That sounds like the right balance." Madison let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Balance, that's what I've been trying to find." "Sometimes balance is harder than war," Harrison said quietly. She turned to study him. The gray at his temples, the lines etched into his face. He knew. He carried his own balance, his own ghosts. And in that unspoken understanding, Madison felt something she hadn't felt in years, seen. Back at her apartment, the walls felt smaller. The quiet felt heavier. Madison set her uniform neatly in the closet and sat on the edge of her bed. Her mind replayed the day, not the offer itself, but the realization behind it. Spectre wasn't a chapter she could close. She was part of her. The question now was how to live with that truth without letting it consume her again. On her nightstand sat a framed photo, her and her younger brother at a county fair years ago, long before war had hardened her features. His smile was carefree. Hers was, too. She touched the glass lightly. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered into the empty room, "but maybe I have to try." The silence gave no answer, only her own heartbeat, steady and relentless, reminding her she was still here. And maybe that was enough for now. How do you teach someone skills that almost destroyed you? Madison Cole stood at the edge of the firing range, not the quiet facility at Fort where she once played the invisible clerk, but a secured training ground reserved for advanced candidates. 12 soldiers waited behind the line, rifles slung across their chests, eyes sharp with the eagerness of men and women who thought they knew what discipline meant. They didn't. Not yet. The assignment had come faster than she expected. A trial roll, General had called it. Just a week after their meeting, Madison was handed a stack of files, trainees selected for special operations, each with talent but uneven precision. Her task: evaluate them, train them, shape them into something sharper. She resisted at first. "I'm not an instructor, I don't do lectures," but the general's voice had been calm, unwavering. "You don't need to lecture. Just show them what you know. Give them what kept you alive." Now here she was, standing in the cold morning light, her presence both foreign and strangely familiar. She wore no rank insignia, no name tag, just plain fatigues. Some of the soldiers glanced at her with curiosity, others with skepticism. To them she was a ghost story wrapped in flesh. Rumors had spread about the woman with 121 confirmed kills, the clerk who wasn't a clerk. She began without ceremony. "Position 1, she called. A young corporal stepped forward, shouldered his rifle, and sighted downrange. His stance was solid, but too rigid. She could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his breathing fought against the trigger pull. "Stop." He froze, uncertain. "Your body is fighting the rifle. You don't force a shot. You become still enough that the rifle forgets you exist. Start again." He shifted, adjusted, tried again. Better, but not enough. Madison crouched beside him, voice low. "You're thinking about hitting the target. Don't. Think about the space between breaths. That's where the shot lives." The corporal hesitated, then exhaled. His next round hit center. His relief was obvious. "Better," Madison said simply, moving on. One by one she corrected them. Posture, breathing, patience. She stripped away the habits that came from firing too fast, from treating the rifle like a weapon instead of an instrument. Her words were sparse but deliberate. Sweat clung to brows despite the cold. Targets showed groups. Confidence replaced frustration. But Madison didn't smile. She couldn't, because every correction she gave came from somewhere inside her she tried to lock away. When one sergeant fumbled a shot and cursed it under his breath, Madison's voice cut sharper than she intended. Discipline, that word means everything. You don't curse the shot. You curse yourself for breaking discipline. Her tone was cold, almost harsh. The range went quiet. The sergeant swallowed and nodded. Madison's jaw tightened. She hadn't meant to sound like that, but the ghost spoke through her sometimes. During a break, she stood apart, watching the trainees huddle together, laughing quietly, shaking out tension. Their camaraderie reminded her of a time when she was the same, before the weight of 121 lives pressed against her ribs every night. Colonel Harrison appeared at her side. He'd been watching quietly all morning. "They're learning," he said. "They're mimicking," Madison corrected. "Learning comes later." He studied her profile. "You're harder on yourself than on them." "Because I know what happens when you get it wrong." Harrison didn't argue. He just let the silence stand. That afternoon, she demonstrated. The trainees lined up behind her as she lay prone, rifles settled into the dirt. The range stretched to 1,200 meters, targets barely visible against the shimmer of heat rising from the earth. "Wind speed?" she asked. A lieutenant called out, 5 knots crosswind left to right." "Wrong," her voice was flat. "It's 7, and it isn't steady, it's cycling every 8 seconds. Watch the flags." They checked again. She was right. She settled, exhaled, pressed. The shot rang out, echoing downrange. The steel plate chimed a second later, perfect center. Without looking up, she chambered another round, adjusted for the wind shift, and fired again. Another center. She rose, brushed dust from her sleeves, and stepped aside. "Your turn. Every miss is a lesson. Every hit is proof. Learn which matters more." The trainees moved forward one by one. Their shots were uneven, some striking, some missing by inches. But each of them learned in real time what Madison meant. Precision wasn't about skill alone. It was about discipline layered on discipline. By evening, the group was quieter, more focused. Respect had replaced skepticism. That night, alone in her quarters, Madison sat with her rifle disassembled on the table, cleaning, oiling, reassembling. The ritual was calming, familiar, but her mind wandered where she didn't want it to. To the boy in Syria, 15, maybe 16, barely taller than the rifle he carried. She hadn't wanted to take the shot, but she had. Her commanders had praised her judgment. Her team had survived because of it. And yet, years later, she still saw his face when she closed her eyes. She set the bolt aside, her hands trembling for just a second. Teaching others meant reopening all of it. The precision, the discipline, the memories. She wondered if this trial roll was a bridge or a trap. Her phone buzzed. A message from Harrison: "They respect you, even if you don't see it yet." She stared at the words for a long time before setting the phone down. Respect. That wasn't the point. She wasn't here for respect. She was here because the general was right. Her cover was gone, and this was the only way forward. By the end of the week, she knew the names of every trainee. Not because she wanted to, but because she needed to. If she was going to shape them, she had to know who they were. Corporal, quiet but sharp. Sergeant Lewis, overconfident but adaptable. Lieutenant, eager but easily rattled. She began to see pieces of herself in them, the hunger, the doubt, the flashes of fear hidden behind bravado. She began to wonder if teaching them wasn't just about passing on skill. Maybe it was about giving them the things she had never been given. The warnings, the truths, the reminders that precision didn't end when the shot landed. It lived with you forever. One evening, as the sun bled red across the range, a trainee asked the question no one else dared. "Ma'am, what's it like, the first time you take a life?" The group fell silent, waiting. Madison looked at the horizon for a long time. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. "It's like a weight you can't put down. You tell yourself it's necessary, that it saves lives, and maybe it does, but the face stays with you, every time. Anyone who tells you it doesn't is lying. The trainees shifted uncomfortably, but they listened. And Madison realized that maybe this honesty, was the only gift she could give them. Not just the skill to take the shot, but the strength to live with it afterward. What happens when the line between teaching and fighting begins to blur? 3 weeks into her trial assignment, Madison Cole could already feel the shift. The trainees had moved from clumsy adjustments to precision she could respect. Their groupings were, their breathing steadier, their discipline sharper. They weren't snipers yet, not truly, but they were closer, and the difference was hers. Word spread as it always did. Reports traveled up the chain. General was pleased. Colonel Harrison kept a measured distance, but his pride showed in subtle ways. A nod when a trainee hit a near-impossible target, a quiet word after long days. But behind the approval came something else: pressure. It started with whispers, staff officers arriving at the range to observe, intelligence analysts slipping her files on counter-sniper case studies, invitations to just sit in on strategy meetings. Madison resisted at first, keeping her answers clipped, her tone professional but cool. But the net was tightening. They weren't just asking her to train, they wanted her insight, her judgment, her presence. One evening, Harrison stopped by her quarters. He leaned against the doorframe, his face drawn with fatigue. "You've made an impact," he said simply. Madison looked up from the rifle she was cleaning. That's what they wanted. They want more. She set the bolt aside, studying him. "And you? I want you to decide what you can live with." His words were steady, but his eyes carried weight. He knew. He'd seen operators dragged too far back into the shadows, losing the fragile balance they'd fought to build. Madison sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Every day I step closer to who I was, and every night I wonder if I'm just digging my own grave." Harrison's reply was quiet. "Sometimes the grave isn't in the ground. It's in staying silent when you still have something to give." The words lingered long after he left. The next test came without warning. An unmarked folder landed on her desk. Inside, surveillance photos, tactical maps, lists of names. A suspected insurgent cell operating overseas, rumored to have professional sniper support. The mission outline requested her input, not as an operator but as an analyst. Madison stared at the pages for a long time before picking up a pen. Hours passed. She marked probable firing positions, calculated lines of sight, outlined counter-sniper tactics. When she handed the folder back, the young officer who delivered it looked at her with something close to awe. "You see things no one else sees," he said quietly. She didn't reply, because she wasn't sure if that was a gift or a curse. Her influence grew. The trainees began repeating her words like doctrine. Discipline means everything. The space between breaths is where the shot lives. They looked at her not just as an instructor, but as a standard. One afternoon, Corporal approached her after drills. His voice was hesitant. "Ma'am, why do you do this? Why teach us? You don't have to." Madison paused, caught off guard. She could have given the easy answer: orders, assignment, duty. But the truth pressed harder. "Because someone has to tell you what this really costs," she said softly. "Not just the shot, the life after. If you don't know that, the rifle will own you." Nodded, his eyes heavy with thought. For the first time, Madison felt something she hadn't in years, purpose that wasn't tied to the trigger itself. But the military machine was relentless. General called her in again, this time not to persuade but to present. A training program formalized under her name, a doctrine shaped by her experience. They wanted her to travel, to instruct across bases, to evaluate advanced candidates. "Your knowledge can save lives on a scale you've never imagined," said, her voice calm but edged with urgency. "But only if you accept that your role must expand." Madison sat in silence, the folder heavy in her lap. Expand meant exposure, travel, recognition in circles she tried to avoid. It meant admitting she was Madison Cole the clerk anymore. She looked up, and if I say no? His answer was blunt. You won't be forced, but others will fill the gap, and they won't do it as well. More soldiers will die because of it. The weight of that truth pressed like a stone against her chest. That night Madison walked the perimeter of the range alone. The cold bit through her jacket, her breath fogged in the air. She thought of the faces of those she'd lost, those she'd killed, those she'd saved. Her whole life had been a battle between anonymity and necessity. She'd chosen anonymity once, and yet necessity had dragged her back. Now she stood on the knife's edge again. Her phone buzzed. A message from Harrison. You don't have to be Spectre to make a difference, but you can't hide forever either. She stared at the screen until her hands grew numb. The next morning she stood before her trainees. The sun was low, the air sharp. They waited for instructions, rifles ready. Madison studied them, their faces young but hardening. She realized something with sudden clarity. Spectre had always been about taking lives. Madison Cole could be about saving them. She lowered her voice. Today we do something different. Today we learn how not to fire. Confusion rippled through the group, but they obeyed. Madison walked them through scenarios, when to hold, when to wait, when not to pull the trigger even when they could. The discipline of restraint, the power of silence. By the end of the session, their faces carried a different weight, understanding. And Madison realized that maybe this was her way forward, not burying Spectre, not surrendering to her completely, but reshaping what she meant. A ghost that didn't just take lives, a ghost that left behind a doctrine of discipline, restraint, and survival. That night she wrote a message she never thought she would. To General, I'll expand the program, but on my terms, training only, no deployments. She sent it before she could second-guess herself. When the reply came minutes later, understood. We'll honor that. Madison let out a breath that felt like the first real release in years. She wasn't free, she might never be. But for the first time she was Spectre alone, she was something more. And maybe that was enough. What does it mean to carry a name that was never meant to be spoken? Months passed, the training program grew. Madison Cole's influence stretched further than she ever imagined, bases adopting her doctrine, trainees repeating her words like scripture, commanders citing her evaluations in their reports. Yet through it all, she remained a shadow. No press, no ceremonies, no recognition beyond closed doors. And that was how she wanted it. But the world had a way of testing convictions. One winter morning before dawn, Harrison appeared at her door. His face was set, his eyes sharp. "We've got a problem," he said simply. A convoy transporting her trainees, young soldiers she had just finished certifying, had been ambushed on a mountain road. Survivors were pinned down, hostiles entrenched above them. Command wanted to deploy air support, but the risk to the trainees was too high. They needed ground precision, someone who knew the terrain, someone who could break the ambush without escalating into slaughter. Someone like her. Madison felt her chest tighten. "I told no deployments." Harrison's voice was calm but heavy. And she respected that. "But this isn't deployment, this is rescue. Your people are down there, the ones you trained." Her people, the words cut deeper than he knew. By noon, Madison was in the mountains again. The terrain was brutal, sheer cliffs, snow-choked passes, the convoy stranded in a narrow valley below. Smoke rose from disabled vehicles. Sporadic gunfire echoed off the rocks. The hostiles had the high ground. The trainees were trapped. Madison crawled into position on a ridge overlooking the kill zone. Her scope swept the enemy lines, disciplined, coordinated, well-armed. Professionals again. Someone out there was supplying these groups with training. That thought she tucked away for later. Her crosshairs found a hostile sniper nestled in the rocks. Range, 900 meters. A clean shot. The old rhythm pulled at her, begging for release. One squeeze and she could tilt the battle. But then she saw movement below. The quiet corporal she'd trained. His posture was low, his breathing steady, his eyes searching for opportunity. She recognized the stance instantly. He was using her doctrine. He had a shot, a difficult one, but possible. Madison's finger hovered on the trigger. She could take it, guarantee the kill, save from the weight of a first shot in combat. Or she could let him try, let him own the moment, let him carry the discipline she had given him. Her breath slowed, her pulse steadied. She whispered into her comms so softly it was almost to herself. Between breaths, wait for it, trust it. Through her scope she saw him exhale, shoulders relax. He pressed. The hostile sniper dropped. For a moment the valley went still. Then the trainees moved as one, breaking from cover, pressing the advantage. Madison guided them with quiet calls, warnings, corrections, calm directions. No shots fired from her rifle, only words. Within 20 minutes the ambush collapsed, survivors secured, trainees alive. And Madison's rifle silent. The debrief afterward was different. Commanders praised the trainees. His name carried through the after-action reports as the one who had turned the fight. Madison stayed quiet, watching from the back of the room, unseen as always. Later Harrison found her outside, leaning against the cold concrete wall, eyes on the night sky. "You had the shot," he said. "I did. But you didn't take it." She nodded once. "It wasn't mine to take." Harrison studied her, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth. "That's the difference, isn't it, between Spectre and Madison Cole?" Her gaze lingered on the stars, her voice soft but steady. Spectre would have pulled the trigger. Madison knew when not to. Weeks later summoned her again. This time there were no folders, no proposals, just a simple statement. "You've proven something I didn't expect, Miss Cole. You've shown that discipline isn't just about making the shot. It's about knowing when not to." Madison's reply was quiet. "That's the lesson they need most." Nodded, "And that will be your legacy. Not 121 confirmed eliminations, not the ghost name that followed you, but the doctrine of restraint, discipline, survival." Madison held her gaze, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. In the months that followed Madison's role, she traveled, she taught, she shaped. Trainees who never knew her real name carried her lessons into battlefields she would never see. Her influence spread like ripples in water, invisible but undeniable. She never reclaimed the anonymity she once had. Too many eyes had seen her. Too many whispers had carried her name. But she found something else. A fragile, hard-earned peace in knowing she had reshaped the ghost inside her. Spectre still lived. She always would. But Madison Cole had taken back the power to decide what that name meant. One evening she walked the range at Fort again, long after the trainees had gone. The air was still, the target's distant shadows against the dusk. She lifted her rifle, sighted downrange, then lowered it. She didn't fire. The silence was louder, stronger, more final than any shot she'd ever taken. She stood there for a long time, breathing in the stillness, letting it settle around her like armor. And when she finally turned away, her voice carried softly into the night. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts."